There she was, Nancy Pelosi, the architect of modern liberal power, the high priestess of performative resistance, a woman whose shadow once stretched across every corner of Capitol Hill like a velvet curtain over the machinery of government. She didn't just pass legislation. She built dynasties, political action committees, family foundations, consulting firms, all orbiting the epicenter of her influence like satellites around a radiant, unyielding sun. Her name carried weight not just in the halls of Congress, but in the boardrooms of America, whispered in the same breath as stock tickers and donor checks. For decades, she had been untouchable, a figure draped in the elegance of power, her every move choreographed to project strength, resilience, and moral clarity. But on this day, she wasn't wielding a gavel. She wasn't presiding over a vote or raising champagne at a donor gala in Napa Valley, surrounded by sycophants and silk gloves. Today, she was under oath. Across from her sat Pam Bondi, clinical and quietly lethal, a prosecutor's calm, masking the storm she was about to unleash. The room had changed. Gone were the adoring crowds, the clapping press, the carefully curated reverence. This was no ceremony. This was a reckoning. The chamber was packed, but not with admirers. Auditors filled the seats, their pens poised like scalpels over a ledger. The air wasn't warm with praise. It was radioactive with anticipation. Bondi didn't bother with niceties. She opened her folder, a simple gesture that carried the weight of a guillotine's release. "Madam Speaker," she began, the title now dripping with irony, "you spent decades selling America a brand, a grandmother with grit, a fighter for the people, the first and last line of defense against tyranny." She looked up, her eyes steady, unblinking. But strip away the slogans, and what's left is a business model, one built on access, timing, and connections. You didn't dismantle the system, you became its most profitable franchise. A hush fell over the room, thick and suffocating. Pelosi blinked once, slow and deliberate, a move she'd perfected in 1,000 photo ops. But there were no cameras to charm here, no lenses to soften the edges. She hadn't fallen into power by accident. She'd engineered it, brick by brick, deal by deal. She didn't climb a ladder. She constructed a tower and pulled it up behind her, leaving no path for others to follow. That same structure, built to shield her, had now become a cage, and Pam Bondi held the key. Bondi tapped the screen in front of her, and the first document flickered into view. "Transaction date," she read aloud, her voice cutting through the silence like a wire. "Asset, Visa Incorporated, $530,000 sold by Paul Pelosi. 12 days later, the Department of Justice files an antitrust suit against Visa. That's a 12-day head start, convenient, lucrative, and, according to every standard outside this building, suspicious." She flipped the page, her movements precise, unhurried. 2 closed-door briefings, 1 committee report, and 1 very well-timed stock dump. She turned toward the chamber, her gaze sweeping the room. If this were Wall Street, it'd be insider trading. But because the trade was made by the husband of the Speaker of the House, it's just business as usual. Pelosi didn't move, but the cameras, those few allowed in, caught it. A slight tension in her jaw, the kind only visible when power feels friction for the first time in years. This was the core of the Pelosi empire. Not transparency, but timing. Not service, but strategy. She didn't oppose the rich. She outplayed them, all while claiming moral superiority from the podiums of Washington. Bondi pressed on, relentless. Let's not pretend this is an isolated incident. You called yourself a public servant, Madam Speaker, but your portfolio tells a different story. She clicked again, and a new document appeared. NVIDIA call options, $1.5 million, purchased 10 days before the CHIPS Act vote. NVIDIA stock surged 14% post-vote. That wasn't a policy win. That was a family windfall. You helped write that bill. You marketed it. You stood on stage calling it the future of American tech. And then you cashed in behind the curtain. She paused, letting the numbers hang in the air like smoke. You weren't making America competitive. You were making Paul rich. Bondi flipped to the next section, her voice steady as steel. Your daughter's media firm, $4 million in contracts from political action committees, many from organizations you fundraised for. Your son, affiliated with energy firms benefiting directly from legislation you promoted. She closed the folder momentarily, as if to let the facts breathe. This isn't nepotism. This is enterprise. Political royalty cloaked in public service. You ran Congress like a consulting firm, one that drafted laws by day and traded stock tips by night. Pelosi wasn't a revolutionary. She was a brand. Behind the feminist slogans and grandmotherly charm lay a cold, calculating empire built on inside information and outside influence. Bondi turned to the committee, her tone unwavering. The Stock Act was supposed to prevent this. Instead, it became your handbook. You weren't above the law. You were just ahead of the enforcement. She tapped the screen again. 5 trades, 3 bills, 2 coordinated family contracts, and 1 common denominator, your name on every page. She stared straight at Pelosi. This isn't ethics. It's exploitation. You didn't bend the rules. You authored them. Bondi's voice shifted just slightly, a subtle sharpening of the blade. You called Republicans enemies of democracy. You called conservatives corrupt. You said billionaires shouldn't control government. But you left Congress one of the wealthiest public servants in modern history. You claimed to hate the system, but no one played it better than you. Pelosi didn't just live in the swamp, she terraformed it, shaping it into a private enterprise while calling it public service. This isn't about partisanship, Bondi said coldly. It's about pattern. Because if a Republican had made these trades, if a GOP spouse had sold shares 10 days before a committee vote, if a conservative's family was tied to millions in contract work, your party would demand resignations before lunchtime. She turned to the panel, her words deliberate. But because she's Nancy Pelosi, the rules were optional until today. Pelosi didn't lose her legacy overnight. She'd spent years trading it for convenience, influence, and control. She wore power like pearls, elegant, expensive, untouchable. But in the end, Bondi didn't attack her. She unmasked her. No anger, no theatrics, just numbers, facts, and truth. And when the truth came knocking, Pelosi blinked first. The room wasn't quiet anymore. It was holding its breath. Everyone inside, from the aides on their phones to the journalists scrambling for headlines, realized this wasn't just about a few well-timed stock trades. This was about intent. This was about pattern. Bondi had promised to pull back the curtain, and she wasn't done. She lifted a flash drive and handed it to the clerk. What you're about to hear, she said, is a sworn deposition from a former senior staffer in the Speaker's office, redacted for security, verified for authenticity. The screen flickered to life. The voice was distorted, the face blurred, but the content was unmistakable. We were told to track legislation alignment with Paul Pelosi's portfolio, the voice said, flat and mechanical. I raised concerns. I was told, quote, the speaker doesn't do things she can't control. After that, I stopped asking questions. The chamber went still. Pelosi didn't flinch, but the smirk that once ruled Washington was gone. Bondi let the silence settle. Madam Speaker, is that how you define leadership? Legislation by spreadsheet? Portfolio-driven policy-making? This wasn't an isolated misstep. It was an ecosystem, a loop of power, profit, and silence. The longer it ran, the richer it made her. The Democratic Party didn't just ignore it. They enabled it. Pelosi didn't operate alone. She operated inside a fortress of campaign cash and compliant media, all while claiming to defend democracy. Bondi tapped again. Exhibit B, internal communications between your legislative aide and your son's energy advisory firm. The emails projected onto the chamber screen. Needs speaker's input before vote on solar credits. Her name carries weight with subcommittee. Looping Paul in, he's preparing investor call on Q, 2 projections based on bill passage. Bondi didn't need to explain. The implication was self-evident. Your son was preparing for a bill before it was public, she said, turning slowly. You say you represent climate justice, but in your world, green energy isn't policy. It's leverage. It's profit. It's Pelosi Power Incorporated. She opened a new folder, revealing a web of names, dots, and timelines. This isn't just family favoritism. It's coordinated enrichment. She pointed at the chart. Christine Pelosi, $4.2 million in contracts from passees affiliated with speaker-aligned committees. Paul Jr., 8 corporate board affiliations, 4 directly impacted by legislative activity during your speakership. Your nephew, appointed to a federal environmental board with no credentials, days after a DNC fundraiser hosted in your private residence. The names floated in the air, unchallenged, undeniable. This isn't public service. This is a dynasty wrapped in activism and disguised as duty. The American left accused others of dynastic rule, nepotism, and corruption. But what was Nancy Pelosi, if not the queen of congressionally endorsed cronyism? She didn't blur the lines between private interest and public office. She erased them and built an empire where policy was a family affair. Bondi wasn't finished. Let's talk timing, she said, her voice a quiet hammer. An early draft of the Energy and Equity Act circulated in your office. 2 days later, Paul Jr.'s company files for a patent based on clean energy grid optimization. A week after that, the final draft is submitted. She raised an eyebrow. Is that the legislative process, or just front-running under a different name? She clicked again, revealing another email. Please delay press release on tax credit expansion until after Q1 restructuring confirmed with Paul and Christine. Bondi folded her arms. You didn't manage a Congress. You managed a coordinated political family syndicate, insulated by power and fueled by privilege. Pelosi didn't fall into corruption. She institutionalized it. Her legacy wasn't the votes she counted. It was the wealth she multiplied, all while accusing others of being bought. You claim to be the conscience of Congress, Bondi said, stepping forward. You stood on podiums lecturing Americans about greed, about abuse of power, about doing what's right. But behind every talking point was a loophole, behind every speech a trade, behind every policy a payout, and now the receipts have arrived. The left had told the world Pelosi was untouchable, a symbol of resistance, an icon of grace, the mother of the modern progressive movement. But mothers protect. Pelosi extracted. She built a career on rhetoric and a fortune on insider knowledge, passing bills by day and moving money by night. As the lights dimmed and the documents spoke louder than spin, Bondi didn't offer a verdict. She offered the blueprint of collapse. The next chapter would be written in subpoenas. There comes a point in every scandal when denial dies, not with a scream, not with a press conference, but with silence. And in that silence, Bondi moved. The chamber had already felt like a courtroom. Now it became one. She rose, folder in hand, the kind prosecutors carry when they're no longer building a case, but delivering it. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice crisp as a courtroom gavel, "I am formally referring Representative Nancy Pelosi to the Department of Justice for investigation." The room snapped into a freeze frame. Journalists froze mid-keystroke. Democratic aides stared like deer in headlights. This referral includes potential violations of the Stock Act, federal anti-corruption statutes, campaign finance coordination, and obstruction of oversight investigations. Supporting documentation has been submitted in full. Pelosi didn't blink, but her legacy just did. For decades, she'd been the untouchable matriarch, draped in pearls and protected by press clippings. Now she wasn't historic, she was under review. The moment Bondi's words hit the air, the ripple became a wave. News networks broke formation. Headlines flashed, "Bondi moves against Pelosi. DOJ investigating former speaker." Even the most sympathetic outlets couldn't spin it fast enough. "This is significant," one analyst muttered. "Even if you believe this is political, the documents are real." Social media erupted, not just in conservative strongholds, but in swing states too. Hashtags trended. Pelosi referral, Trust justice for insiders, Trust Bondi strikes back. The first fracture wasn't in the media, it was in the party. "We take these allegations seriously," a moderate Democrat muttered to a press gaggle outside the chamber. "Ethics must apply to everyone." Translation, she's on her own. The Congressional Progressive Caucus, once Pelosi's loyal choir, released a vague, time-delayed statement. 4 paragraphs of platitudes, 0 defense. In private, the knives came out. "She stayed too long," they whispered. "She got sloppy. She thought the rules didn't apply." They didn't say it on record. They didn't have to. The walls were closing in. By week's end, 3 major PACs paused donations to Pelosi-affiliated initiatives. Wall Street firms began scrubbing press releases from past galas. A former bundler in San Francisco, once one of her most loyal donors, quietly canceled a speaking engagement. "We love the speaker," he told a reporter, "but this isn't survivable." Pelosi wasn't just bleeding support. She was bleeding money, and in Washington, that's worse. Then came the letter from the Attorney General's office. "The department has received formal documentation requesting an investigation into Representative Pelosi regarding financial misconduct, legislative conflicts of interest, and possible obstruction of federal ethics oversight. A preliminary review has commenced. Official, federal, historic." Bondi marked a date, justice stirred, while Pelosi, who'd dismissed critics as extremists, faced the DOJ, unmoved by her books. At a DNC meeting, her problems split them, silence or distance, an aide whispering, "She's a liability since Bondi's affidavit." Her baseless claim flopped against "we submitted evidence," her photos fading as history rewrote her from first speaker to federal target. The party's myth buckled under subpoenas. She preached accountability but hid in privilege, now exposed.